The meninges are a component of the central nervous system, and our central nervous system is made up of the brain, spinal cord, and the interneurons. So essentially, the functions of the meninges is to protect and cover the brain and spinal cord of our central nervous system. So the meninges have three layers: the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. So over here we can see, if we take a closer look at our skull, at the top over here we have our scalp, which has these hair-like projections. Then below it we have the periosteum. Below the periosteum we have the skull bone. But if we take a deeper dive below the skull bone, we actually find the dura mater. And below the dura mater, we're going to find the arachnoid mater. And below the arachnoid mater, we're going to find the pia mater. So over here, if we take a closer look at our dura mater in this diagram of the dissected brain, we can actually see that it's a pretty thick layer. And that holds true because out of the three layers of the meninges, so we have the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater, the dura mater actually makes up the thickest layer. And we can remember that because dura kind of sounds like durable. So when we think of durable, we want to think of the thickest layer. So the dura mater is our thickest layer, and it's the outermost layer of our meninges. And the purpose of the dura mater is essentially to protect our brain. And that can be kind of intuitive because if we're thinking about a thick covering that covers our brain, if it's a thick covering, it must serve to protect our brain. So this dura mater, if we would take a really close look over here, it actually has these vein-like structures all over, and these vein-like structures, they serve to carry blood from the brain back to the heart. And of course, the brain needs oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, so we have to have some sort of system to bring that deoxygenated blood back to the heart. And that's done by the vein-like structures in the dura mater. So over here, we can actually see our arachnoid mater, which is the second layer of our meninges, and we can see that the arachnoid mater, it actually has this spider web-like structure if we take a really close look at it. And if we peel away from our arachnoid mater, the next layer is our pia mater, which is actually pretty fascinating. So we went from our dura mater, which was such a thick layer, in comparison to our arachnoid mater, which is so thin, and then we have this pia mater over here. So the way we can remember arachnoid mater is that when we think about classifying animals by their scientific names, arach literally refers to a spider. So when we think of arachnoid, we know it's going to be that web-like structure, and it's going to make up the middle layer of our meninges. And lastly, we have the pia mater, and the pia mater makes up that last layer of the meninges, and it's the most delicate in comparison to the arachnoid and the dura mater. So it's the thinnest layer, and it's in the most contact with the brain and the spine, and it's very delicate. So there were three layers to the meninges. There was the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. It's pretty straightforward, not too complex. Now lastly, between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater, we actually have this space, and this space is filled up with cerebrospinal fluid. And the reason we have this cerebrospinal fluid is that we want to cushion our brain, reduce that friction, and have some sort of a shock absorber. So similar to how our heart is surrounded by fluid to reduce the friction and provide some sort of cushioning, our brain works in a similar way, because the brain and the heart are two very delicate structures that we have to protect. So they're both protected by some sort of a fluid. And when we talk about the brain is protected by the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, the cerebrospinal fluid, as I mentioned, cushions the brain, reduces friction, and it acts as a shock absorber. Now, the cerebrospinal fluid is produced by the choroid plexus, which is a type of tissue in the central nervous system. So over here, we can actually see the choroid plexus. Now, the choroid plexus is the tissue found within this fluid compartment in the ventricles of the central nervous system. So over here we can see the lateral ventricles, the third ventricle, and then here we see the choroid plexus, and this is all a fluid-filled environment. So the choroid plexus will produce that cerebrospinal fluid, which will move through these ventricles, and then it'll enter that space between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater. And then it'll act as the cushioning shock absorber barrier. So once again, the cerebrospinal fluid is produced by the choroid plexus in this fluid-filled space of the central nervous system, which we call our ventricles. Now, lastly, we might remember that the ependymal cells are the macroglial cells that circulate the cerebrospinal fluid in our central nervous system. So if we remember back to our different type of macroglial cells, there are actually several different classifications, like the astrocytes. We had the satellite cells, the Schwann cells, the oligodendrocytes, and so the ependymal cells are one of our macroglial cells, and over here we can actually see that the macroglial cells will act to help circulate that cerebrospinal fluid, so it doesn't end up staying in one position. It actually keeps moving on through, and it continues to cushion the brain and continues to protect it. And that is essentially the layers of the skin. So remember, when we start to peel away and try to find our brain, we start off with the skull. We reach our periosteum, the skull bone, then we reach the dura mater. Below the dura mater, we'll find the arachnoid mater, which is a web-like structure. Below that web-like structure, we're going to find the pia mater, which is in close contact with the brain, so it's very delicate. And between that pia mater and the arachnoid mater, we have the cerebrospinal fluid, which cushions the brain.